We are small for this final Q&A, but I'm thankful for those who have come. I don't want anyone to leave without having answers to questions after coming all this way for a conference. So we want to make sure that we have enough time to answer any remaining questions or have more discussion about classical education and special needs. You might want to move forward as we're figuring out. It might be helpful. We do have a microphone runner, Michelle. So this session really is just the final Q&A. Anything that we haven't talked about thoroughly enough, or anything that still is a question in your mind, or maybe new things that have come up since we started talking about these things. So we'll just go ahead. Who would like to start? And while we're waiting, how many parents do we have here? Parents of a child with special needs, sorry. Okay, and how many teachers? How many headmasters? I think they were all in our last headmaster session. Okay. And then we have some combinations. Okay, question, yes?
When you have a student that's struggling, the struggle hasn't been identified. And then when you can, sometimes it's obvious, some things are obvious, and then you think about that student maybe moving forward but needing extra resources, maybe like social training, or in the future then connecting to where maybe with vocational, with the VR program, to think about moving, or just having a diagnosis so that they would have access to how do you feel about that, and presenting that to parents to seek after that.
So you're asking in a teacher role, things that you see moving forward, and you're wanting to present it to the parents, but not sure how. And what age student are we talking about roughly?
Right now, I'm teaching second grade,
Oh.
and I'm just wondering how, if you feel like that is a priority to have needs labeled and identified, and to be able to just understand, have more understanding, be able to access in the future, especially to be able to connect with resources and programs.
In your situation, do you think the parent would be open to such a discussion, or would it blindside the parent at this point?
I think that discussion has been there, but no action has been taken.
Okay, so second grade, there isn't the urgency that there might be as they're, say, 17 or 18, and they're starting to hit that time where it would be nice to have a formal diagnosis. So you might have a little bit of time to play with, but at the same time, if you're starting to see gaps widening, then it can be very helpful to know what's going on, which is what you're seeing. If you can document what you're seeing, I assume you've done some of that, maybe try to make an even more compelling case for why you see this child who seems bright, but is otherwise having something blocking the learning. Then it's possible that you could lead the parent to say, we would be willing to at least look at a screening for some things, in which case they could go to the public school, they could contact their pediatrician. If they need a referral, they could get one. It might be time to do that, so you could encourage that way with some data. We're seeing this become an increasing problem. It's not getting smaller. So I'm concerned about this student for the next year. I don't know that I would go for the lifetime concern. That's because that's hard to hear, but But for next year, as academic demands increase, we would like to see what it is. And sometimes these evaluations can be very helpful. And you can say, this is as much for me as it would be for the student. I want to know how I can help him for the remainder of this year. And then I'll partner with the teacher next year so that we can have these things carry on. So you make it a team effort, but it does sound like it's something that they can look into. And often, Easter seals, Knights of Columbus, clinics at children's hospitals, they can have different avenues to go privately if there are reasons they don't want to use the public school. And those can be inexpensive or free. The public school can also sometimes partner with the school and you can come on site, or the family can go to the public school and ask just for a screening or an evaluation. There are a lot of options, ways they can do it. Or they can go privately with their own insurance.
Do you think that in the classroom or I know some of your resources for social training, do you think that would be my responsibility to maybe develop some of those for the classroom, or that would be the responsibility of the parent?
We have schools teaching myself and others, which is what you referred to, myself and others, lessons in social understanding, habits, and manners. We have schools teaching the entire class from that, just because everyone needs manners. It's a nice program, it's very popular, it can be taught from age 4 all the way to 13. If you have time to teach it in your classroom, that would be ideal, and then you can send things home for the parents to reference, but you're not singling the student out.
Yeah.
It
Did you
benefits
read
everyone.
some of those resources?
Yes, myself and others. If you look over on the table, they are on the far right. You can find them online as well, since our conference is coming to a close.
Yes.
But what they are, they're lesson plans, daily lesson plans. I think it's 4 days a week, age 4 to 13. Each is its own little unit. So the first one involves no writing. It's more for the 4s and 5s. Highlands Latin School uses it for their junior K program. The first one, book 1. They're little lessons on rules, listening, identifying our feelings, things like that. But it's in a context of literature. So at the end, we read a book of children's literature that kind of sums up what we've talked about. There are visual cues, which is helpful for our kids with autism or auditory processing. You use the same cues and hand signals every day with it. It's a fun little program to teach. It can be after lunch or first thing of the day. So that could be a good thing.
Yeah, it's something fun.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I have a question that a high school teacher gave me to ask. He couldn't be in here. He says, I often have students enter the high school several levels behind on reading fluency. Some from diagnosed learning issues, some with possible but undiagnosed disabilities, some from other schools that didn't teach them well, and some who simply refused to learn. How can we best approach sorting the reading issues into the various categories? Is that even helpful? And then how can we approach parents gracefully with concerns? And then thirdly, this is to be the big one, without increasing the teacher's workload significantly or stretching the budget with professionals, how can we get students individual help?
Well, that's easy. That would be a very short answer. Okay, there's a lot there. Great things to clarify. So the first one is is it helpful to try to figure out who has dyslexia, who just doesn't want to learn, who has educational neglect, for lack of a better word, but I think it's very helpful. Is it possible in his particular situation? Maybe not, to tease that all out. It's kind of up to the parents to say, we want to know why he's so far behind, and then that's when you can encourage them to pursue an evaluation, of course. I think the refusing to learn, of course, that's the hardest one, because you have to try to do, like Kevin Clark said, you have to try to capture their wonder and help them see that it's so worthwhile to learn. That's not something that is easily accomplished, and yet that is the teacher's role. That one, in a sense, is also the easiest, because if you can do that, helping him to learn to read through something he already loves, perhaps, then you've got that one accomplished. The ones who have, say, dyslexia, and you suspect it, they can improve their reading fluency simply by having whatever's being taught sent home as an audiobook, but they must follow along. That's the thing. So we're not just letting them passively listen. It's that kind of guided reading that people who study such things, the neurocognitive scientists, say that actually helps the fluency. If a parent, or an audiobook if a parent's not available, reads with good inflection and a good rate, and the student follows along, that can be helpful. You can also partner read, so that the parent or the audiobook reads part, ideally a parent again, and then the student would read a small passage, and then the parent takes over, kind of just like you do with young children. What was the second part of that question? Approaching parents gracefully with concerns is similar to the first question. Making a case, but then also making sure that it's coming out of not your own frustration, but coming out of concern for that student, that you know that we could be doing more here. We really would be helped by knowing what's going on with that student. Have you ever thought about having a formal evaluation? Chances are it has come up. Either mother-in-law or someone has suggested it, or they've thought about it themselves. And then that can prompt we probably should get this done. You can have some resources in your own area that would be helpful to send them. A lot of pediatricians might know, or they might not know, but if you can kind of scope that out so that they know where to go, where it's not super expensive. If you don't have insurance and you go privately, it can be a $4,000 or $5,000 event. So if you're sending them to something that's not private, that would be more persuasive, of course. But it is helpful to tease it out, especially at the high school level, because they're not going to just need that for now. They're going to need that if they go to college, or even with some occupations. It's nice to have the ability to disclose, if they want to, that they have auditory processing difficulties, or they have dyslexia or dysgraphia, and some accommodations would be nice. It allows them to be able to advocate for themselves when they have that information. A friend, she's a homeschooling mom, 7 or 8 children. She's become a friend through Simply Classical. She just told me a week ago that her son, William, entered a writing contest of all things. And she said this is just such a miracle. He's in upper school now, and we've worked with the family since he was younger. We tweaked the homeschool schedule so that writing was the first thing in his day, because writing was so hard for him. Autism, dysgraphia, with the autism, real rigid thinking, so he couldn't think of something new to write. He had already written it, thank you. You know, there was no reason to edit, there was no reason to think differently. Well, we did classical composition, fable, that's the first level in classical composition. You take a fable, you rewrite it, you add things, you do things like Kevin Clark was talking about with amplification and all of that. It's a wonderful program. He responded so well to it, became a strong writer. He also went through this evaluation process and learned about himself, and he processes slowly, just like I described with my son. So he enters this competition and he requests extra time on the writing. He advocated for himself because he knows the language. I have this diagnosis. I'm going to get extra time. Is that possible? They said, yes, it is. There have been some studies, and you know, educational studies are a soft science at best, but they seem to indicate that the average student, or a bright student, or a typical student doesn't really benefit from a lot of extra time. In fact, sometimes it can be worse. And you know yourself, if you have too much time to get something done, sometimes you just don't. But with a child who processes slowly and really has to think, what is it I'm trying to say? How am I going to say that? The extra time can be really beneficial. And we don't know if he's won yet. All I know is that William came back and said, I think it went well, and I know that I had a good ending. He felt satisfied having entered, but it was because he had the information going in, and just the confidence. It made the mom feel so good. He did that on his own. So she knows he could advocate in the workplace, or if he goes to college. Also, if you go to a community college and you have that paper trail of your diagnosis, as you know, there's so many helps now for such students. If you just say that you have dyslexia, that's not going to be the same as if you can say, this report says. So in those high school years, it can be really helpful. Even in the younger years, though, it shows that it's an ongoing thing. This isn't something you're creating at the last minute. This has been an ongoing issue. So there are a lot of benefits for having a good evaluation.
I have not been in your other session this weekend, so if you answer this question, I apologize and I can talk to you afterwards. Along that line, do you have any resources? Are there any that you would suggest for our classroom teachers who have a sense of something's going on? But I know a lot of times for parents and even for making a case for them having an evaluation, having documented, like objective, like here are the things I observe, not just the sense of something's wrong. Do you have resources, or are there resources you would suggest specifically for that? That's my first question.
Yes, and let me answer that first so that it's still in my mind. So the first question is about, do we have anything that could help in this process of talking with the parents? And we do. Simplyclassical.com is the place to go for everything. When you look at where do I start, there are readiness assessments. In those readiness assessments, which are free, downloadable, they're online, there are categories like not yet reading is one group, learning to read is another group, and then reading chapter books, I think, is the next so you can figure out where your starting place is. But you just download the assessments. They're in different categories. Fine motor, the early ones have gross motor as well, language, cognitive, social emotional work habits, reading, writing, spelling, math. There are different categories. You can fill out whatever it is that you're concerned about and say, this is where a typical student is falling in my classroom, but this is where I see your student falling. You could encourage them to take a look themselves. They can do a lot of this themselves over the summer in terms of some remediation, start working on things. That's a possibility. At the back of each level, we have an 8-week review that's ideal for summers. But yes, that can be something that you take. It's just a checklist. You rate everything either yes, it's mastered, or EM for emerging, or no, it's not there at all. So you check each box, it tells you how to score it, but it is nice to have some sort of checklist to present rather than just, this is my hunch or my observation. Yeah, so that's a great thing to do. And also, when you say you didn't attend the others, if you have an interest in this area at all, I urge you to get the first talk, because that's really the framework for all that we do. The first talk was much more of a lecture style, where it was an hour of a presentation. You have access to that through your conference registration. Definitely watch the first talk. And those of you in schools, I assume you can share that with your faculty. I would encourage that as an in-service kind of a thing to get conversations started. People find our story to be an encouragement and a hope-filled motivator to say, okay, we've been waiting to do something here. We know we have some issues we need to tackle. Let's start. Let's start tackling some of those. Okay, your second part.
So the second question, I am doing academic advising. That's why I'm here. Our other person was in your first one, so we're a team. And my question is, I've done some training over the last couple of years, and I cannot remember the name of it, but in the place of an IEP, or even if it was only accommodations and not full modifications, there was a number or a thing that we as a school can create that sort of stands in because we're not a public school.
Well, there's a 504, which is probably what you're thinking of, but private schools have some leeway depending on your state. So some schools just do a student plan, an individual student plan that can suffice.
And that's where when they're moving on, then even for like ACT testing, if they need accommodations in that, or when they're going to go to the colleges, if they're going that way, or different places, like having that, I'm realizing how really helpful that would be for them going on. So.
Right. Yes. Again, you've got that written documentation. It's not just their word coming to the college. Yes. So that's a service in itself, just providing that for the family.
I just have a question about the screenings. Are those designed mainly for the teachers to fill out, or is that something that we would send home to parents as well? If it's observing and, a checklist type thing?
It would be for whoever is teaching. If it's a homeschool setting, then the parent could do that, but many parents aren't going to know, is he capable of doing triple-digit addition? Or is he spelling words like luxury and decline? So it's a teacher that fills it out. There are some things that you could do at intake if you didn't know and we do encourage that to not just be surprised when you place a child that you know is coming with some challenges. Go ahead and test, and then you'll be able to match up better if you don't have that already in place. But use those assessments that way to see where he would be best placed in, say, math. It can save a lot of frustration and embarrassment if they have to move backwards.
Okay, my question is about our struggling learners and when they're doing math, fact, fluency. That's very important in our school. With a lot of our struggling learners, if we do anything tiny for them, it's a disaster and it sets them up for no success. So I would just like to know your opinion with that, or possibly the best way to assess them on that, or is it pointless or not pointless? You know, is it good for them? I'd love to know your opinion.
What age?
I teach 4th grade,
Okay.
but it's across the board. Basics, we hold math, fact, fluency theory at, most importance. So, but we all probably have 1 or 2 struggling learners who struggle with that. And we just want to do what's best for them and
I appreciate that, and that has just been the heart of everybody here, and it's just so wonderful. What I have seen work really well in classical schools is to start every math period with math, fact, fluency, but do it in coro. So recitation, everybody together. That way, you don't have the writing issues coming into play. It's faster, and you can do it together, so no one's singled out. And everyone benefits from it. You can do this in phonics as well, but you just have a flip chart, say, and a pointer, just the old school. You go through, and 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 2 is 3, 1 + 3 is 4. You don't want to do the facts that they know, so if they know all the ones, don't do those, because then by the time they get to the ones they need, then they're but everyone does that, and it's kind of a math warm-up. It just gets your mind working for math. Now for testing, you can do it different ways. You can have personal bests. You could say, we know that you can do X amount of facts in 1 minute. What we're looking for, you can do this for everybody, what we're looking for is more. So you did 25 facts in a minute. Let's see how many more you can do next time. You could grade that way. That's what we had to do with my son, with his processing. This was true for everything. I taught them piano too, so they're music facts, knowing the notes. Michelle happens to be just like boom, boom, boom with facts. Michael had the processing difficulty, so it took him a while to do it. So I made a chart, and it was a big chart. So like 1 more fact looked bigger and more encouraging on a bar graph. But we just made sure that we were making progress, so he could see, I am getting faster, even though compared to the twin, maybe not so.
There's a tip I wanted to give you guys. When I was a little kid, I was having trouble with multiplication. That's Mom may or may not know this, but
And do you remember that?
there's something that I would say would help you. When I was a little kid, I liked listening as well. I have at least one that has imaginary chalk and this and that, eraser. But what was big and central was 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2. So there, and they've got discounts for presidents, they've got discounts for states and capitals, they've got for this, that, and the thing. My advice is get the can read it while he's eating, you can read it before, whatever. So, that's my advice.
The other thing, as they get older and they don't have those facts, you could have a strip, just like a desk strip with cursive, but a strip of the ones he doesn't know. Maybe he doesn't know the 4s, the 6s, and the 7s, or something like that, so that he's not slowed down with, say, long division and having to try to recall what is 6 times 7. So that can be something that's faded, hopefully, over time, but in the meantime, it's kind of the accommodation and remediation that we talked about before, where you need to make some accommodations possibly, but you also want to be teaching those facts to make sure that they do come up. You can send home too. You don't want to send home too much stuff, especially if you already have a lot of homework. But it could be a summer thing. One time we did, what did we do? 50 days of math many ways. We just made it a bingo thing. So Michelle has always struggled more with math than with literary things. So she had to do different things, like fill in an addition chart, say 10 of them, just for math facts. My husband said, he was looking at the whole situation. He said, well, when I learned multiplication, we had these tables that had the X at the top and the numbers across, and we had to fill them in every day. So we just printed out a whole bunch of those for not just her, but also her brother to have to fill out. You can send those things home, because you're right, that math fluency, that automaticity that they say, that's what allows you to then do a more advanced math. And so you can make that appeal. We know you're going to go beyond these, but what we want is for this to be just automatic, so you don't even have to think about what's 6 times 7 anymore. There are songs, of course, too, the math fact songs. I don't know how effective those are, but that's something that you can encourage for the summer. And car trips, yes, we listened to those. There was one that had the math fact on it. Again, I don't know if it helped as much as some of these other things, but it might depend on the student. You're welcome. And checking time. Okay, we are good. Next, remember, we don't want you going home without your own situation addressed.
Reading comprehension is a big issue. I teach 5th grade, and so at this point, we're doing a lot of self-discovery, self-teaching as well. In the textbook, we read it together, and then answering questions based upon the text, and going back and finding that is so daunting to these kids who are slow readers and can't find the answer as quickly. So, do you put the page number on there for everyone to go find? Do you help that student specifically and say, this is on page 80 somewhere, this is on, how do you help them when they're supposed to be learning how to teach themselves, but they're still in that, they just can't understand what they're reading?
It does seem that it's a fair accommodation if you have time or if you have an aide. That would be nice if you had an aide, but to go ahead, you're going to know where the answer is. Hopefully it's in your teacher guide or something, or you just know having read through it. But you can make a mark. I often did that. I would just mark something that I knew I would need to help with as you're going through it, but maybe just have a sticky and say some of the students get this sticky system where they're going to have it in their books. Or it could be something more discreet than that you can come up with, where no one really knows who has it. But really the overarching thing, like you said, should we do this for everybody? Well, no, we don't want to do that for everybody, because not everyone needs that. And that defeats the purpose then of having them try to remember or recall where it was and think about it. it comes back to the idea of what is fair, which we hear a lot. What we're trying to do is to just think of if we had a student who needed a wheelchair to access the school. Let's say that we only had steps. It's an old building, there are only steps to the front door. What would we do to allow that student to be able to come in? We would figure out a way to build a ramp. Now, would everyone need to use that ramp? No, most of the students are just fine to use the steps, but we're going to have a ramp to learning. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. We have one headmaster who just very matter-of-factly tells the students, we're going to give you whatever you need. We're not going to give you what you don't need, but we will give you what you need. Rest assured, and we're figuring this out. You don't need to ask for anything extra. We're going to figure it out. You're in good hands. We've got this kind of a thing. And some things will look different for some students, but we know why we've chosen to do those things. So just trust us on that. And that seems to be the approach that works the best. Or we'll partner with your parents, something like that, so that you don't have students complaining or students making that observation. Anybody else? No, that's good. That's why we're here. And we have 15 whole minutes.
Okay, I have a student who we do writing poetry, classical compositions for Fable. Student is so good at telling the story. His mom and I are trying to figure out, is it really helpful in his learning process if he says the story and we dictate it? For me to assess his understanding and his progress, and then can I just have him retell it to me without having dictation, or do you think it's best for this child to try to go ahead and write it in just the extra time?
So you feel like he could just tell it?
Yeah. So what we I have him retell me the story, and we've talked about you're going to follow the outline, we're going to add our variations, and you're going to paraphrase it in your own words, not Mrs. Swift's words, not Aesop's words, it's in your words. So we talk about that, and we practice it, we go through all the lessons. So we've done it both ways, where he kind of just dictates it for me. I write it down, or Mom writes it down, and he does a really great job. And I'm trying to figure out when I assess him on that, do I need his writing for that? Or can I just use his words? Can I use him retelling these things to me orally?
And what grade again? Fourth grade. So I'm thinking two things. One, it's March. It's probably time to fade that accommodation a little bit, so that he's at least writing, let's say, 3 sentences or the first paragraph or something, so that he's doing something. He'll feel much more grown up and much more capable as a young man taking on some of that himself now. It's kind of like the mom who's always drawn the math for the student, pretty soon the child's 11 or 12 and she's still starting to shower or something, It's like you have to do something at some point. It sounds like you're there because he can come up with it on his own, so that's good. But I would fade that a little bit. On the assessment, you could have it be modified. We talked about this yesterday. If you feel like you need to, or you could say oral. So sometimes we did that with the Memorial Press literature guides. We would cover it, but I wrote in on the books oral because I didn't want it to be I didn't want it to look like we didn't do it, or have that idea that you could just skip around or not do things. So that was just our substitute. So you could say that too.
Thank you so much. Okay, I told this woman that I have a tip for her. It kind of hinges on what Mom just said. There are study guides that may be above or below the level. Second, it helps if, say, you're studying literature and it's struggling. What I would do is read the story, have points like, what did Aslan just say? Or whatever. Stop there and then discuss it with them. Say, is this what Aslan means? Or is Lucy saying the right thing? And then go on, and then when you're doing the selection, say, okay, copy this down, and then go back to the part where he was, and read that, think on it, maybe about 5 minutes, and then write down what your thoughts, observations, and other things like that. Because Mom had me do that with the language wardrobe. And first, before she came to talk about this, it was, okay, what's going on here? And then as we approached this interest and stuff, Mom said, okay, can you write 2 or 3 sentences in this, about this chapter, and what your perspective is to take upon? Well, she gave me about 20 minutes to do something, and then she come back and she said, okay, I'd like to see your work. And she looked at it, and looked at it again, looked at it a first time. Okay, normally I couldn't say this, but this guy named Plus. Because it was involved, it had structure, it had indenting, it had paragraph form, and it was captivating, not like Dick said this, Jane did that. It was more like something you could read out of maybe 5th grade storybook. So, just an idea.
And that's a helpful point, Michelle, that breaking it down, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So he doesn't have to dictate it, or he doesn't have to write it all himself, and he doesn't have to do it all orally, but you're doing a little bit of give and take. And even at home, he can write a few sentences and then have feedback on his writing. Then he can write more, and so on. So that breaking it down is a good strategy. By the way, in the Simply Classical Journal, we have book reviews of children's literature. Michelle had approached the curriculum director at Memoria Press when we first started talking about having its own magazine. She said, someone's going to need to write your book reviews. So she is the official book reviewer in the magazine. You can find some of them online, but the older issues, I should gather them up and break them sometime, because they are indeed captivating and insightful. And I definitely try not to over-edit, because I take the Michelle out of it if I do that. What else? Yes, in the back, Michelle.
I have some students this year that have some anxiety disorders or behavior disorders, as well as diagnosed Tourette's. I'm just wondering your thoughts on implementing self-regulation tools in the classroom. Maybe what would be an expedient way to do that within the context of what you mentioned about meeting student needs, rather than doing a broad sweep of everybody gets a self-regulation box versus doing that for that particular student.
What age or what grade?
Second grade.
Oh, okay. Probably the most effective thing, if the student truly can self-regulate, with Tourette's, sometimes that's an involuntary thing, but if the student, if there are aspects of his conduct that he can control, that you want to target, then a teacher-parent communication card can be discreet and yet very helpful. And it can be simple too, nothing, don't make it too hard on yourself, but just something where you're communicating whatever it is that you're targeting. It could be blurting out, although you have to separate that from an actual vocal tic, but or it could be moving about the room, or whatever it is, dropping his pencil, falling out of his chair, whatever is going on that you want to work on. Kind of find the main thing could be interrupting, just that impulse control. Yes, right. Start with that, but then I wouldn't drop that. You probably wouldn't have, right, because then you got the substitution usually, or often. And then just communicate, just so that they know and they can say, "This looks great. You did a great job today." Then you can talk to them ahead of time. It doesn't have to be a reward system with a formal incentive or anything. It's just that we're going to let mom and dad know when you have an especially good day. You can even do it on just the good days. So they can be looking for the card, then he doesn't have to worry about showing the card or not. He would be. Oh, in the car line, it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay.
But I also was wondering, in the context of like having a sensory box or something that helps him regulate when he's really dysregulated.
Okay, Michelle, can you give back the microphone?
I'm also wondering about how to approach the class, about him having a sensory box or something to help him self-regulate.
Okay.
And explaining that to the rest of the class or finding a way for them.
And you said second grade?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very hard. Well, hang on to the microphone.
Okay.
Is that effective? When he has that, does that help him?
Yes. In fact, on Thursday, we had an interaction when he got very upset with some friends and didn't want to receive instruction or discipline from me, and walked off. And initially, I was going to get our head of school to help me deal with the disobedience. But what I noticed was he went over in the gravel, in the sand, which he has been doing in therapy, working in blocks of sand and digging for things. And he went over in the sand and was doing this with his finger in the sand, and I went, he's self-regulating, I'm going to back off. So he's making progress. But I'm mostly, our classroom size is small, and I just currently have 11 students. We'll have 12 next week, and they're very aware of what everybody else gets to do.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to figure out how to have him even just have one in the classroom. Our current plan is he has one with our head of school. So that was what I was hoping to get him to do anyway, was to meet with our head of school, because he has a regulation box in the office.
That is ideal, obviously, because it's out of sight of the little ones. When you're 7, that it just looks like he gets a toy and I don't get a toy, and that's hard to.
The thing that's hard is that if our head of school is engaged somewhere else,
Mhm.
And we can't get to that self-regulation box. I'm brainstorming to do it in the classroom.
Right. Does he sit at the front or the back?
Currently, I have him in the back because he draws me off task.
Mm.
And that's the only, I've tried other options, but that's the only way I seem to be able to manage, because he draws me and he also draws classmates off task. So,
The box, I suppose, could be at the back
yeah, good idea.
because others wouldn't see it quite so much. And you could say, there are going to be times, what you could do is talk to the class perhaps when he's not there and say there are going to be times when, let's say, Adam needs to calm himself down. You're going to see him with something that helps him to calm down. This isn't a toy. We're not giving this as a reward. This is something that helps him. When you see that he's needing help, what I would like for you to do is just pray quietly for him. We have done that in our home many times, especially when they were younger. Instead of explaining or worrying about what's going on, say, he's having a hard time right now, let's pray for him, and it really changes everything. And then they can come alongside a little bit better, perhaps.
I'm dovetailing on that with another question regarding whole class instruction. If other teachers, or if you have seen in your educational venue, anxiety in students through this COVID journey, and if that self-regulation piece might be a helpful tool just in general.
It's true. It may be something that you implement every day, sort of like what we call a sensory diet for people with autism. A lot of students, yes, across the board are having increased anxiety, especially if they were predisposed to that already. I just see an astonishing amount of families saying, my child is suffering from anxiety. So also partnering with the parent to make sure that at home we're not feeding him. So you can talk about that, but we don't want caffeine, we don't want a lot of screen time, we want calming things, teaching that child to relax, teaching the child to learn how to be still. All of that will help too. And I do still like the idea of a card rather than the thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's the parent know what you're thinking, but he can then have a visual that he did a good day of being calm, let's say, or of not talking back, or whatever it is. Then he's the messenger to say he had a good day. And again, maybe just only on
Well,
good
maybe
days.
you could do both.
Yes.
The other were to get lost in the translation.
Yes. Very good. Very good.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
I have a tip for you. If this person has anxiety, and I used to have a little anxiety with things when I was little, as I feel sometimes today, what I would think you would want to do is maybe take a little time and investigation, but get several bins, large or small, depending on what you do, and you write on the bins with a permanent marker, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then in the assembly bin, you might put trucks, or next one you would put dogs, peacocks, playing, modeling, get whatever. And then on this odd day, odd time, you say, okay guys, we're going to have an anxiety-free circle time, and you pull out Sunday, or Wednesday, or
Well, I think we just called it quiet, a quiet playtime. I don't think that we used that actual word, but that's how it felt. So that might be something for the parents too, is to help them relax, even if we had different bins for different days, so that there was a novelty too. And they learned then how to calm themselves by having, say, books in a bin or toys in a certain bin, things to look forward to when they were little.
Well, maybe even a predictable time would be.
Exactly, right, that you know that you're not waiting until there's this near meltdown or this catastrophe, you're instead anticipating it that the person's going to need that calming time. Yes. And you're welcome. And speaking of time, we are out of time, so we will conclude. Thank you very much.